First of all, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. I am Giulia. I am the Impact and Project Manager at Carbonfuture project. And during this webinar, we'll explore what are the key European goals and policies aimed at carbon emission reduction, as well as the challenges and opportunities companies face in adapting to new regulations and transitioning to low carbon energy sources. We will also have the opportunity to contextualize the necessity for the energy transition, what is the current progress, and the role played by emerging and innovative technologies. But first of all, let me introduce our speakers today. We have with us Bottrill, that is the CEO and co-founder of Pilio Ltd, that is a University of Oxford spin-off company. Hi, Catherine. Thank you for being with us today. Then we have Sebastian Manhart, that is the Senior Policy Advisor at Carbon First. Hi, Sebastian. Thank you for being with us today too. And last but not least, Pietro Pasolini, that is the CEO and founder of Carbonfuture project. Ciao, Pietro.
Ciao. Hello, everybody.
So before delving into the topics, just a reminder that you can leave all your questions in the Q&A box and we'll respond during the final minutes of this webinar. So, Catherine, the first topic we will explore today is the energy transition, one of the most important key drivers for reducing emissions. I leave the floor to you to show us what we are talking about.
Catherine, you're on mute.
Yes, you're on mute. Can you hear us, Catherine?
Yes, here we
go. Okay.
Great.
Okay, so okay. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. A real pleasure to join you on a Friday afternoon to really explore this really important topic of what does achieving net zero and why do we need to focus on energy so much. So I've been working on the energy system for now almost 25 years, looking both at the demand side and the supply side. And I think we're in a really important juncture right now. The momentum is here as we lean into the clean energy transition. So hopefully over the next hour, we're going to be exploring what might that look like for Europe and what might the role of business be in catalyzing and unlocking the potential of the energy transition. So one of the things is why focus so kind of explicitly, why center energy to be so critical in this clean energy transformation. And when we're looking at the climate change and the kind of concerns that climate change has coming into this century and increased temperatures, changing in like how our crops are going, what it is to live in a city, it's really important to understand, well, what's causing that problem, what's causing the release of greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere. And as you can see from this graphic prepared by the World Data, it's very clear, like energy and our use of fossil fuel energy contributes to almost 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions. So when I'm thinking about us addressing as a society climate change, we've got to keep eye on the prize, and it is looking about like how do we pull fossil fuel energy out of the energy system. And then there's these other really important sectors, which are, for example, agriculture and land use, and we'll be kind of exploring a little bit of that later as we look at carbon removals. And then waste and industry, and that will be like other forms of greenhouse gases like CFCs and refrigerants, etc. But I think if I want you to leave this webinar with no misty eyes, this is all about the energy and how do we transition away from fossil fuel energy that has given us much of our modernity, but now into the 21st century, we need to think, how do we access more cleaner energy transition? So you know, and I think many of us on the call, joining this call, are kind of really aware, but just so we're all on the same page, so what might be the key reasons that we want this clean energy transition? Well, I've already highlighted climate change being an important sort of almost existential threat to kind of living systems. Then there's also this idea of the resource depletion, you know, where there is abundance of fossil fuels in the ground and in the globe, but they're increasingly harder to reach, or they're in geographies that have all sorts of political tensions. So there might be reasons why we don't want to get those reserves out. So we do have this access, I would say, access to those fossil fuels is becoming more limited. And then fossil fuels not only emit carbon dioxide, but they also emit many other pollutants. And for those of us who've traveled into cities, and here I'm based in London, and even in London, we have very poor air quality, and a lot of those pressures of air quality are coming from the use of fossil fuels. And then also twinned along climate change, we do have the biodiversity crisis. So I would say fossil fuels are contributing to that pressure on the loss of biodiversity because of the areas, whether it's in the oceans, in the seas, on the land, the sort of accessing production of those fossil fuels is also impacting our biodiversity. And then for all of us who've been living through the war in Ukraine, are kind of very cognizant of the instability that's created by fossil fuels. So there's economic factors to us relying on fossil fuels. It does change the cost of energy, and especially when it's really shocks like we have had in the Gulf, but in the 90s when we had the war in the Middle East, and in some of those regions, there's still significant instability, and that comes down into the cost of energy, and that then impacts you as businesses, and then your customers, and then your ability to do the things that you might want within your businesses. And then I'm going to sort of highlight where are we at the current status in a moment about where we are in our clean energy transition. But I think the new European directives are really kind of shaping. We need to take a holistic vision around the clean energy system. It's a systems problem, so we can't take a kind of siloed. So it's both achieving net zero, it's about affordability, you know, so we can't present wonderful renewable energy technologies that are going to cost the earth because they won't be adopted, they won't be used. So we need the energy to be affordable. And then the really exciting thing, which I get really excited about the clean energy transition, it opens up new job opportunities, really good, interesting jobs, whether that is actually within the development of renewable energy projects, or like my own company working on analytics, you know, helping people make better decisions by understanding their energy impacts. So I think we're seeing all sorts of really exciting, good jobs that are coming from the renewable energy and the green energy transition. And then, as I've just been highlighting, energy security for Europe and for every country, whether you are within the Middle East, Asia, Africa, you know, having access and your own resilience around your energy systems is better for your society. So when we think about the clean energy system, keep in mind these 4 things, and keep these 4 things in mind for your own business operations and the resilience of your business operations. And so, as I mentioned, this is a systems problem, so you can't kind of, you can take a step-by-step approach, but you almost need all the slices of the pie going. And Sebastian's going to be highlighting some of that, and Pietro as well. But definitely this, you know, as we come out of fossil fuels, we need to adopt renewables, and those renewable energies are everything from wind, solar, hydrogen, are the main sources, tidal power, and each country and geography will have a different kind of basket of renewables that are like fit for its context. So I think what's also interesting around renewables is that it is a more decentralized source of energy. So you need to be cognizant of what your local context is. But then it's not enough, just as we know in the UK, we've been really good at building the wind turbines, offshore, but you've got to get the power. Scotland has a really wonderful wind resource. The UK is surrounded by tidal, but you've got to move that energy from A to B. And the way I like to look at it is, for example, in the UK and for much of Europe, we've built a centralized energy system. So it's almost, then you need like the big highways, the big motorways to move that centralized energy from A to B. But then when you have renewable energies, you often have a distributed system. So then you need a network, like a road system that's like your B roads all the way across the country. And I think this is, for many parts of Europe, we've not been putting sufficient resources in building the infrastructure to like allow the deployment of renewables. So there's lots of people, project developers who are really keen. I talk to them and I talk to my clients who want to do renewable energy systems, but they can't plug it in. There's not the capacity to get it. So it's the less sexy part of the renewable, this clean energy transition, but we need the infrastructure. And then, as I've already highlighted, this has to be affordable. But what's amazing in the last 10 years, especially, the competitiveness of especially solar and wind is becoming price competitive with traditional fossil fuels. So this has been a big piece of it. When it's more expensive, it's very hard to make the business case to invest in it. So not only for the project developers, but also for taxpayers, for businesses, it's got to make economic sense. And it's got to, you have to have payback periods that are, from a business point of view, you're looking back at sort of within a 3-year payback. And then for a kind of developer of projects, you're definitely looking back for those paybacks within 10 to 15 years. And then the other piece of the clean energy transition is that carbon capture and storage, which is absorbing the greenhouse gas emissions at point. So we have got many assets, fossil fuels will continue to be an important part of our energy mix, especially over the next 5 to 30, 20 to 30 years. And especially when we're thinking about outside of Europe, carbon capture and storage is going to remain an important kind of piece of the pie. And there's different types of technology, and it is expensive. We're still at the kind of piloting stage, but we're at a point where we can start to deploy carbon capture and storage. And again, the regulatory environment is going to be really crucial in enabling those projects to come off the ground, so that the financial players that are backing these carbon capture sort of solutions are able to make the investments. And then the last bit is, obviously we've had over the last 25 years, we've had the growth of especially the internet technologies, the Internet of Things, and battery storage. I would say that's the other key thing. Not only do you need to move the energy, but you need to store the energy. And I think this is where we're seeing some really important innovations happening, is around the investment of energy technologies and new solutions that will come. And I think as we get into the Q&A, some of you might have some specific questions that you want to ask, and I welcome that. So where are we at present in this journey? So Europe, we already had, our current state is almost 1/5 of energy is now coming from renewable energy sources. But excitingly, the EU has now put this into legislation, legally binding, that by 2030, to achieve almost 2/3, upwards of half by 2030. Now, this is a huge, we've got 5 years now, and that's almost just 1.5 business cycles to plan. So if you think about that, you've got to know which technologies, what are your opportunities. You need your financial backing behind it, and you need to build and install all that infrastructure in place, alongside having all that road, effectively road network to move that energy. So it is achievable. It wouldn't have come into legislation unless it was achievable, but it really requires a kind of keeping the eye on the prize and not waiting until 2029. We will not achieve this target if we wait until 2029. So over the next 6 months to 5 years, we need to work collaboratively together to really support that infrastructure. and that is, you know, the minimum. You know, what we're really looking at is, and I think what's also really important, sometimes, you know, renewable energy, and it will come on in my next few slides, but sometimes when people talk about the clean energy transition, that they're really talking about electricity. And electricity, you know, we talked about, you know, the title of today's session is about decarbonisation. And electricity is an important part of how we're going to move to this decarbonisation. But one of the big wedges is transport, which at the moment is not powered predominantly by electricity. So not only do we need to transform all our buildings, get rid of the gas boilers within our buildings, but we also need to get rid of all the petrol pumps around the continent. And so when we're thinking about this clean energy transition, we've got to think about, like, how do we switch out those liquid fuels into the electricity, and then how are we going to source that electricity from renewables? And renewable electricity is not mobile in the same way. So again, I'm sure some questions might come through as we go into the Q&A. And then I think Europe is leading globally in kind of designing a kind of holistic framework, regulatory framework, and has done really for the last 20 plus years. And this is, you know, this is kind of some of the different legislation and regulations that is coming through to achieve that 55% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030. So you'll see right up there here, the top is energy performance in buildings. I've come from a built environment background. 40% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are from buildings. They don't move around. So actually we can adapt and retrofit, but we've all got to be living and working in greener, cleaner buildings. And then the Europe, I'm just going to highlight a couple of these, but the EU emissions trading scheme has been a really great way. It's been going for about 20 years now, and it really, especially for the big emitters, it puts a kind of cap on how much emissions they are allowed to emit, and then they have to go and buy credits if they're going to exceed that. So I think what you're going to see is more of these kind of trading schemes coming through. And then I'm just going to highlight here aviation and maritime. So each of these are kind of a significant part of the greenhouse gas problem, but these are some of the toughest industries to shift out. You know, the planes, once you invest in a plane or a ship, these infrastructure will last 30, 40, 50 years time. So the planes that are getting built and put on our runways today, they're going to be in existence and running like out to the second half of this century. So what we need to do is encourage more efficient use of flights. Some of the legislation that's going around, especially, for example, France, we're discouraging the use of domestic flights. That's happening here in the UK. These are kind of, we need to think of the demand side alongside the supply chains, because aviation and shipping are more tricky sectors to reduce. So Pietro is going to be talking a little bit more about kind of what businesses can do, but I'll quickly do a couple of highlights here. So the first thing is, if you're a business, you've got to think about your kind of capital projects, you know, any assets that you own that are using energy. So the first bit is to think about your buildings and reducing the emissions of that. And then the second is thinking about the clean energy infrastructure that you can put in. And again, it's the less sexy part of the energy transition, but heat pumps is all about the heat pumps, and because that's going to allow the electrification of your buildings. And then this mixture of putting on solar within your buildings, as well as centralized solar, you know, solar farms. Then another piece of it is looking at where you're purchasing, and especially in more liberalized energy markets, you know, really incentivizing and putting your energy budgets with energy companies that are investing in renewable infrastructure, and then entering into power purchase agreements so that you really know the kilowatt hours that are on the grid, that those you can like attribute them to your own kind of contribution. And then I also already been mentioning transport. So just thinking a bit more about, like, if you have car fleets in your businesses or you're using taxi companies, you know, really thinking about, well, are those companies can we use electric vehicles? And especially now there's some great work going into trucking vehicles, public transport. So just making sure, again, you're taking that purchase ledger and working with the companies that are aligned to also supporting that. And then the just transition, I think there's both within your own companies thinking, well, what do your colleagues really need to understand? And, you know, I work a lot with facility managers, you know, they all need upskilling, electricians, all the suppliers that come in and might do special capital projects with you, or just that regular work of maintaining your boilers, your lighting, you know, the number of solar panels that have gone up that have not been cleaned, and that's just because nobody's been instructed and knows how to do that task.
Catherine, thank you very much for sharing with us such insights about this complicated, let's say at the same time, important topic. I just have a couple of questions for you on how will the policy and regulatory framework for the clean energy transition impact businesses operating in the EU?
Yes, so yeah, great question, Giulia. And so I think the main area that businesses are going to be impacted in the first stage is about their environmental reporting. And so CSRD, which is the major new legislation, which is really asking companies to do what's called a double materiality assessment. So it's asking them to say, okay, what are your environmental impacts and what are the risks and opportunities of those environmental impacts, and greenhouse gas emissions? And your energy sourcing will be one of those material impacts. So the first thing is to look as a business, and this initially the legislation is going to, the first wave of businesses in Europe are having to start compliance and report in 2026. And so the first thing is to look at your assets, you know, whether those are buildings, those are transportation, and to start quantifying and doing your kind of carbon footprint on those emissions. And then this legislation will be coming towards SME businesses. So I think if you're an SME business, you might start finding that your customer is starting to ask you, what are you doing on it? So I would say the first thing is organizing your data, understanding where you've got exposure, and then identifying key members of staff, if you haven't got one, who can really lead and coordinate this. And the first thing is those staff coming and attending webinars and sessions like this to start building a kind of understanding of the language, confidence, and start building professional relationships into that.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I mean, where would you recommend a company start in being a clean energy, in being part of a clean energy transition?
So the first thing I would do actually is look for within your country that you are within Europe and find out what the grid mix is of your country. So you can easily find that out just through a simple search from it. So for example, I know now in the UK, almost 50% of our electricity is coming from renewables. And I know that a significant proportion, I know in the spring and the fall, some days, the whole UK electricity grid is getting 100% powered by renewables. So the first thing I would say is just find out, well, where is your country on renewables? Where is your city in sourcing renewables? And then the second thing I would do is go and look at my energy company. So whether you're with E.ON, British Gas, you know, looking up and finding out what their commitment is, and are they a company that are just simply buying renewable energy certificates, or are they actually making investments into those renewable infrastructure? You know, do they have projects that they're trying to do on solar or wind? And then I would look at, can you be on one of their green energy tariffs? So that is probably like the simplest thing for a business to first do, know where your energy is coming from. So I hope, you know, the second thing that you do, you know, you'll leave this webinar knowing that energy is really important, and you'll know your first piece of homework is to find out where your energy is coming from. And then the next thing is to start finding who the team within your business might start working on this, you know, starting to like undertake your carbon footprint and doing a building energy audit. I would say that's the next thing.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you. So now, exploring how such an important topic can be addressed and integrated, Sebastian will guide us through the world of the European policies and carbon removal. Sebastian, so what are the key European goals and policies aimed at reducing carbon emissions by 2030 and 2050?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Giulia. And I'll give a bit of context first, and some of it I'll keep short because Catherine already touched on it. And then, also obviously at Carbonfuture, we focus a lot on carbon dioxide removal, and maybe starting there, for those less familiar, there is no net zero without carbon dioxide removal, or CDR for short. It's an essential component for net zero. It's not the primary one. The primary is emission reduction, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we will have between 5, 10, 15% residual emissions that we cannot abate, we cannot avoid. For those, we will need carbon dioxide removal. And let's not forget how much CO2 is already in the air, heating up the planet. And again, that can only be tackled with carbon dioxide removal. In Europe, we've got a 2050 net zero target. For people who are not familiar, the EU has 27 countries. This creates a policy floor that countries cannot go below, but they can go above. So there's a bunch of countries like Germany, Denmark, Sweden, who have 2045 net zero targets. We've got Finland that has a 2035 net zero target. So countries can go beyond this. But 2050 is the deadline. Then we've got a 2030, Catherine already touched on it, 55% emission reduction target compared to 1990 levels. These 55% will get us somewhere there, and we'll see if we can hit them by 2030, but it creates a huge gap between 2030 and 2050. And this is what the EU is currently working on, which are 2040 targets, the recommendation reinforced by the now re-elected Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, is a 90% reduction target by 2040. So the key 55, 2030, 90% 2040, 100% 2050. And that's obviously a very ambitious target that we hope will be passed in 2025, 2026. Where does that leave us? That does leave us with a lot of carbon removal. So for 2050, the estimate is that we will need around 115 megatons of industrial carbon removal. And then there's a whole section of land use change and forestry, LULUCF, which is, I will talk about less, but that's a big chunk. And for 2040, the aim is around 75 megatons. So 2040, 75 megatons, 2050 on net zero, 150 megatons across Europe. To give you an idea where we are today in Europe, we're probably in the tens of thousands, at best hundreds of thousands, in terms of where CDR is at right now, industrial or permanent CDR. So we need a big change in terms of scaling this up to the levels that we need.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Thank you, Sebastian. And so how the European policy support the development and implementation of carbon removal technologies?
There's a lot to be done. I would say first, the main vehicles for reducing emissions might also become the main vehicles for scaling carbon removal. So we've got the ETS, the emission trading system, and we've got the ESR, the emission sharing regulation. Those two between them cover basically 100% of European emissions. So the ETS covers heavy industries, already heard about it, but power, aviation, steel, cement, all of that. And then the ESR covers everything else, agriculture, buildings, transport. And those are really important vehicles. The ETS is managed basically centralized. This is a cap and trade system, and we're getting more and more industries moved into the ETS. The ESR is managed member state by member state. And so now we're talking about what would CDR look like integrated into these systems, because the ETS, which is really the main vehicle, it runs out of allowances in 2039. So for it to actually exist beyond 2039, it will need carbon removal. There's not really another way around it. And the Commission will develop a proposal and publish it by 2026, what it will look like for CDR to be included at the earliest in 2031. The other key thing that I will point out is the so-called carbon removal and carbon farming regulation, CRCF. This one is important because it's the building block that we need to use CDR in any European legislation. It's a very foundational piece of work that focuses on what does good carbon removal look like? How do we certify it? How do we put a European stamp of approval on top of a carbon removal? And that allows us to then take the CRCF units and put them into the ETS, into green claims, into whatever policy we want. So ETS integration is the big one, but in the meantime, CRCF, and we should have that up and running by 26, early 27.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And one last question for you. I mean, what measures are in place to ensure the accuracy of environmental claims and to combat greenwashing within Europe?
Yeah, so maybe first, what is an environmental claim or green claim? It's basically anytime a company makes a claim about whether it's its products, its services, maybe even the company itself, saying that it's climate neutral or carbon friendly or whatever it says. I mean, you see these, just walk into a supermarket, you see hundreds of these. The European Commission actually did a study and they found that 54% of them are complete bullshit. And they decided that they had to crack down on it in the effort of protecting consumers, but really also protecting the climate. And so they are working on what's called the Green Claims Directive, which is quite advanced now. We should hopefully see an agreement reached on it early next year. And the Green Claims Directive essentially, what we know so far, again, this is still work in progress, is that it will likely allow offsets to be used, or compensation claims, as they're called, to be used for environmental claims. So if you say you have a carbon neutral iPhone, you will essentially have to back it up with the right offsets. And what's currently being debated is what counts as a right offset. The Parliament wants a more stringent stance, which means only durable, high quality carbon removals, maybe even CRCF stamped, will be allowed. The council, the other negotiating party, is a bit more lax and currently has an open definition. But we're probably going to see some tighter requirements in the green claims. And if companies don't stick to it, so if in future you say this is the carbon neutral iPhone, but you have compensated it with low durability carbon credits, and the green claim says that it has to be high durability, you can get some serious fines, 5% of global turnover of a company. So we're still going to see a lot of action, and this is probably the first thing that is going to hit businesses, because it could already be live, towards 26, 27, with some real measures for businesses to adhere to.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And talking about businesses in such context, we know that businesses play a crucial role. So every company can apply key strategies to actually start this journey. Pietro, how can we achieve decarbonization by balancing internal reductions and offsetting residual emissions?
Yeah, thank you, Giulia. I'll share my screen, hoping that you all managed to see it, because I have a couple of slides. Can you please confirm me that you see it well?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. Yeah. So let me just close this as well. Yeah. So in terms of decarbonization, and today I'm going to focus primarily on scope 1 and 2. As we know, as the SBTI, so Science-Based Target Initiative, clearly outlines, businesses should really try and reduce internally as much as possible. Depending on the sector, obviously, this number can go up until 90% of the total emissions. So via utility optimization, obviously, we're talking about clean energy, but we're also talking about a better usage of energy, supply chain optimization, which today we'll talk less about, because the objective is really scope 1 and 2. I think it would need a whole webinar, scope 3. And then offset residual emission. And obviously here, the key is high quality. However, I'm going to focus a little more on the reduction. And in Green Future, we kind of have a 3-step approach, if we manage to scroll it down. Yeah. So the first one is obviously calculating the carbon footprint. So it's clear that if you don't know where your pain points are, if you don't know what your total emissions are, then there is no way you can put in place a clear decarbonization target. Also, calculating your carbon footprint allows you to define a baseline. The baseline is the year from which you're comparing all your future reductions. So the first objective has to be of a company to calculate in a correct way, and here data gathering, so ensuring that you really collect high quality data from your suppliers, from your energy suppliers, from direct emission is really key to define a correct baseline under which you will develop a successful decarbonization strategy. Once you develop that, it's clear, obviously, to set annual targets. As Catherine said, we cannot arrive to 2029 and say, okay, now we finally get started. So for example, software allows you to set, once you calculate your total carbon footprint, you can set targets on an annual basis and really understand where you're getting with your decarbonization strategy year on year. So once you've defined the decarbonization strategy, and today I really wanted to leave you with some practical example and really go practical. When you're talking about decarbonization scope 1 and 2, so primarily energy consumption, obviously also vehicles that are of property. But what I really want to focus on is installment and collaboration of hardware and software. As we know today, there's some new technology, some a little more new, some a little less, which are instrumental for decarbonization. The first is IoT, so Internet of Things. So technology communicating with one another makes it really in real time and makes it maximum optimization. And then the second point is obviously using large data analysis. So as we know, we have more and more data that can make us take better decision, and the word that everybody is using obviously today, AI. So the focus of what I really want to put out there is that especially on scope 1 and 2, environmental sustainability or decarbonization should go hand in hand with financial sustainability. We all know that it's much easier for the CEO to approve something that generates also an economic saving together with a CO2 emission saving. Linked to energy consumption, this is definitely possible. And I just want to leave you with a couple of examples. So overall in industrial plants, but this also is applicable to any type of large building, office place, hospitals, real estates, large location. Installing a BMS, so it's a building management system, a system that uses IoT technology and allows for a real-time communication and management of energy consumption, can achieve reduction between 20 to 30%. These are industry standard KPIs. So installing a BMS that obviously has a high capex does produce a return on investment, usually between 2 to 5 years. So this is, I think it's essential if we want to achieve decarbonization targets, that CO2 emission reduction, when possible, it's also aligned with financial sustainability. And I just want to leave a couple of examples, because I think one of the main problems here is that companies don't have access to the best technologies out there, because maybe they don't know that they even exist, right? So I think access to information on decarbonization is really crucial. And I just want to put out a couple of examples. So the first one is obviously BMS. BMS are installed all around Europe in any type of, from office building to industrial plants, and generate incredible savings. The great thing here, and I think this goes to public administration and also to the existing private sector, is that if the company doesn't want to make the initial CapEx investment into decarbonization, they have two options, right? On one side, they can go to an ESCO, and so it's basically a bank that loans the capital to do the investment and gets a percentage of the saving. So in that case, it's a zero cost investment for the company, and the ESCO only gets a percentage of what the company actually saves in terms of energy consumption, and therefore energy bill. The second option, which obviously ideally should go together, is incentive, right? For example, in Italy now we have the 5.0, which allows to detract 50% of the hardware and software investment into energy efficiency. And these incentives are at a European level. Obviously, each country has their own, but it's obviously essential that at a European level, the decarbonization pathway is really promoted. A second example is another solution, for example, that we work with a lot, which is allows for easier and better decision making, right? When you develop a decarbonization plan, the hardest thing to understand is where am I at today and what will generate a return on investment in a given time period. There's a few software there that create digital twin of your building in terms of machinery that's installed or of your industrial plant. And it using large data analysis and AI, it can provide you the optimal outcome. For example, we tested this software against one of the big four consultancy firm that did a decarbonization plan for this industrial group, very large industrial group, and the software was 30% more performing in terms of efficiency. So it was actually generating a 30% better efficiency compared to the one of an advisor. What it does is that it has a huge library of all the technologies that are available, every single machinery per brand, and it basically interacts and understand what's the optimal structure for your industrial plant or your building, office, real estate, you name it. Another solution, for example, which it's much more vertical. For example, there's a great company that we connected with in San Francisco that are actually Italian based, and they invented a hardware software solution that also uses AI and allows to create savings into fluid handling that goes between 20 to 60% once installed on specific hydraulic pumps. So this is a hardware solution which is very specific to hydraulic pumps, for example, so only to businesses that are moving fluid throughout their process. And this is what I was saying, maybe a lot of companies that work with fluid don't know that such technologies exist. So I think the access of information is really key. For example, in this case, they come and install totally the technology for free, and they only get a percentage of their saving. Again, so it's a zero capex investment for the company, and it's I'm only paying back if I'm saving money. I'm only paying back part of what I'm saving, right? So what I think is really crucial here, it's the access to information on the best hardware and software solution in terms of decarbonization. And with this regard, my last slide is on an initiative that we're launching, which is completely free, and it's focused on access to knowledge. So we're creating a decarbonization tech alliance, which anybody can partake to, and it's a way for keeping up with the best hardware and software solution for decarbonization available on the planet. There's obviously a board of technical that select and filters between the different technology, but the objective is really to create a physical and virtual meeting point where companies can share their decarbonization journey, because I think that's essential. If a company in a specific sector had a successful decarbonization journey, they should be able and willing to share that information with everybody else, because there's no competition. There is one planet that we're trying so desperately to save. And on the other hand, there's also the hardware providers that can propose their solution, get evaluated by technological experts and validated. So I don't know if somebody can drop the link, but it's free and will allow you to keep up to date with the best decarbonization technology. And so our objective here is really to create a platform for information.
Pietro, thank you very much for this interesting insight about the possibilities out there that companies have to actually implement a really efficient and strategic strategy about onboarding in this important journey for net zero. I see a lot of questions out there, so if you do all agree, I actually would like to start the Q&A session. And the first question is for Catherine. Catherine, I see that you're typing, but we can actually reply live. So hi, Catherine, thanks for your talk. Could you quantify what fraction of energy efficiency will be provided naturally by electrification, e.g. heat pumps and electric cars, and what fraction needs to be contributed through further savings, e.g. battery installation, more efficient data center, etc.?
In fact, Giulia, that was the answer I was just typing out. So I think actually I would flip them around and say the first one is to do those low cost measures, which is the building energy management practice. So as Pietro was talking about in his, is having good analytics and good data behind you can really help make those quick wins savings. So typically buildings that we work with can easily, and we see it, 20 to 30%, and especially looking at your overnight audit. Another thing I could add for people's homework is to do a nighttime audit into their buildings. Can be very illuminating, literally, with the lights still on, and seeing, as Pietro was talking about, the building management systems and the settings, have a good old look, see what that scheduling is. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is more like that fabric first. So typically, putting in insulation, double glazing and stuff will never have a good payback, and it's not typically going to really help you decarbonize. It's going to make a more comfortable building, a more breathable building, but it's often the more expensive thing. So I think if you're wanting to undertake that into your building fabric, just know that you won't really get the savings from a carbon perspective. But then your lighting projects, those payback, we're seeing those payback literally in 6 months' time, you know, with the changes in the energy prices. So if you haven't done that LED quote, again, that's like a no-brainer. Get that in right away. So you've got 20 or 30%, which is just by not really doing anything, but making sure that you've got a designated person on staff to look at it. The second is do the things you're building more for comfort than energy efficiency. And then you're going to have that last capital expenditure, which is for the heat pumps, your solar, which is another 30 to 40% savings. And that energy contract, you know, seeing who you're purchasing your energy is a really good thing.
Thank you very much, Catherine. The next question is, what will a business or a company get if it can reduce its carbon footprint? Is it a certificate, a carbon credit, or a tax incentive? Who feel to reply? Sebastian or Pietro?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. I mean, sadly today there's not huge incentives yet. One thing where a lot of companies ask us to help us on their decarbonization plans, they appreciate, is that having a higher ESG rating, which is obviously the environmental part is a clear part. They can get better loans credit. We hope that regulation in Europe will align with companies that are best performing in decarbonization and provide benefit. On the other side, there's obviously a huge European regulation called CSRD that's coming in place, which makes reporting mandatory for a large number of companies, and it basically goes to smaller and smaller companies every year as we roll post 2026. So today they don't get tax break so far. At least you would have to check in your specific country, but they definitely don't in Italy and a lot of countries we collaborate with. I don't know if Catherine or Sebastian, you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add, which Pietro and I work a lot on this, is you know, have your internal team, you know, work through their carbon footprint, but it's really valuable to have a third party or independent assessor. So going to what Sebastian was talking about, the green claims legislation, I think it gives you more confidence, you know, if you've had that independent kind of review of the data to make sure that you've pulled through the correct calculations, you've set the boundaries for your organization as you undertake your carbon footprint. So, you know, valuable to have that independence. And there are also some ISO standards now that have come out for both carbon reporting and for your net zero plans. And I would say, don't worry too much. These are voluntary standards. They're really useful to read and be familiar with, but probably the cost effectiveness of them only comes into play once you're a larger company. But again, if you're working with good consultants, they should be following those kind of good methodologies and practice and giving you the confidence about the numbers that you're reporting and then how you're using them into your internal decision making.
Thank you very much, Catherine and Pietro. The next one is, since buildings have a great role in greenhouse gases, how is EU planning to build more ownership by the homeowners, and how all panelists believe that role of bringing homeowners is critical part to achieve net zero? Maybe Sebastian, would you like to reply to that?
I can, to the extent that my knowledge allows it. So buildings is currently part of the FHR regulation, which really means that it's more down, how exactly this is incentivized is down to individual member states. And these individual member states will have a lot of different policies to incentivize this, right? Like, but again, it's not my specialty. So I cannot give details on how exactly consumers are incentivized to reduce their emissions from buildings.
Giulia, the thing I can add in, and especially for the Northern European countries, the old heat pump is the big thing. And I think it's the big challenge is we need to put so many heat pumps, and there's different types of technologies. There's water source heat pumps, there's air source heat pumps, there's ground source heat pumps. And air source heat pumps are just a bit like a reversed air conditioner. but they have less efficiency and performance, but they're going to be the easiest way to retrofit buildings. So if you're a homeowner, and especially if you're home working, so this is what's been interesting, you know, in the last few years with people having more flexi working, rather than heating your whole house, is creating and designing the spaces in your house and then putting that old heat pump that would just service one room. And then if you're fortunate enough and you are building your own property, obviously you're coming in through a clean slate. But the really key thing is working with contractors and your project designers, your architects, to really put like really upfront like the importance of energy efficiency and new technologies. The other thing I would say is we've gone through a period of really sealing up our homes, and insulation and like not stopping the heat escaping is important, but also not creating another counter problem, which is the indoor air quality problem, which is almost like a secret killer for us, you know, as we all have our open plan kitchens and spaces. You're actually like, those extractor fans have not, and this is another thing, regulation needs to come in with good standards for proper extractor fans for that indoor air pollution. And then I think it's going to be around the building codes and the planning codes to make sure that we really get the best adoption. But it's a bit like what Sebastian was saying with carbon removals, is it will contribute about 15%. New builds in Europe is only going to contribute really about 15% of the problem. So retrofitting your homes, and whether you're moving offices or moving house, these key moments are the moments where you need to put that investment into that infrastructure. And then just picking up on what Pietro was talking about, and loans and finance, I think we're going to see more products that come to market to make it easier for us to spread the cost, because otherwise it's really high upfront costs and it's very off-putting. So the more financial products that enable us to, like, over a period of time, invest in this equipment will be best. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We need to speed up a bit because we have a lot of questions more. And they're asking if someone of you can explain the benefits and the urgency of carbon capture using biomass and biochar. Who feels, maybe Catherine?
Sebastian,
or Sebastian?
Maybe Sebastian,
Can you go? Yeah.
Sure.
No, especially I do a lot of work on biochar. So, I mean, broadly speaking, the topic of biomass is fairly polarizing because when there's been a lot of bad stories in the past about bad use of biomass, right? Like if you grow purpose-grown food and then essentially you burn it to create sustainable fuels to then power an engine, like there's some questionable things that you can do with biomass. On the other hand, the reality is also California alone has 100 million tons of residual biomass every year that they don't do anything with, that they were pile burning. That's not allowed anymore. That leads to more wildfires because it's littered all across their forest, just waiting to be burned. So there's a lot of problems with waste biomass. In Europe, we have better supply chains for that. We know what to do with it. And we produce a lot of valuable goods from biomass. But a long intro all to say that biomass has a huge role to play in the green transition. Obviously, we have to weigh up what the best use for it is. One option is you make energy and potentially you capture the carbon. That's called bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, which I think is a great use because you essentially produce the energy, you capture the CO2, you then pump it underground, and you can get essentially green energy from it. But to be clear, those CCS plants for BECCS, they're not yet ready. Like some of them will go live in late 25, 26 earliest. Biochar is another great example where you pyrolyze the biomass. So you heat it up at very high temperatures without oxygen. And essentially what you get out of that is three things. You get heat, which you can use for district heating. You get syngases, or essentially synfuels, which you can convert into sustainable fuels. And you get biochar, which essentially is a product that durably removes the carbon from the atmosphere and has a lot of benefits for agriculture. So I'm personally a big fan of biochar in the right environments because it produces a lot of different benefits to humanity, not just the climate benefit. And yeah, all to say that biomass is very important, and how we use it will be a key component of policy moving forward to make sure we adopt the policies that will drive the best impact of a given ton of biomass.
Very well said. Thank you, Sebastian. I just to remind you that we'll have the time to reply just a couple more questions. So for all the other questions, or if you'd like to actually gain more insights about other topics, you can write down at our email address that I will type down in the chat. So couple more questions are, is it good to have focus on decarbonization but not talk about methane? How serious is Europe about it?
So what was that last part, Giulia?
Is it good to have focus on decarbonization but not talk about methane? So, and how serious is Europe about this? Would like to reply?
Catherine, do you want to take this, or?
I couldn't quite hear the second part. Is the ban? Oh, methane. Oh yeah. I'll take the methane question. I like it. It's really interesting. I do a lot of work in agriculture. That's why Pietro was like, take it. So I think in agriculture, it's all about what is the farm system, and farm systems, livestock can be really important in pasture systems. It's about having the animals in the right systems, whereas at the moment in the last 50, 60 years, we've gone for very industrial agriculture. And so I think methane is both partly, adjusting our diets, and then making sure that when we are eating meat, that we're sourcing it from more sustainable farm practices. And I think that links to like what Sebastian's talking about, is some of the carbon removal technologies and how those can be deployed into agricultural lands. And then we've also got the methane that is coming from fossil fuel, particularly plants. And that is like definitely regulation to really not permit that flaring. We've all probably seen the media stories of when it's allowed just to do these gas flares, and that's more about just ensuring that's turned off. But the other thing which I was just going to say, which comes on like both this, what Sebastian's talking about, some of the carbon removals, we're kind of going to a wave where we do need to support innovation. So if you're, and the upscale, Sebastian just mentioned, we've just got the first pilot kind of plants, and I think once you've done your sustainability strategy, if you could look at like where are some opportunities that you could collaborate and innovate with other partners, and that's something that Carbonfuture, Sebastian's company, Green Future's company, and my own can all help you build really interesting collaborations about how to participate in upscaling some of these exciting technologies.
Thank you very much, Catherine. 1 minute, one question more, and then we are done. Are there any best practices for ensuring that the tech stack that supports the BMS is also decarbonized or sustainable?
Yeah, I guess here the objective is of a BMS is obviously to make sure that you can communicate and manage in real time whatever type of building or industrial power plant that you want. So the central part is that it's really what are the features of the BMS, so ensuring that it can do that, because a lot of people buy BMS not knowing that they're buying building monitoring systems, which are important because you get all the information that you need about the building, but it doesn't allow you to manage. So the first important thing is make sure they're both called BMS, right? But make sure you're buying and installing a building management system. It recently happened with a client that installed everything and then learned that it was just a monitoring. And if it's a management, then you really have to look at what type of optimization it can do, and ensuring that it can communicate with all of the technology that you have installed in the building. But yeah, obviously, depending on the features, it can be more prone to really help you achieve decarbonization targets.
And I would just add to that, you almost want a building management system and your monitoring system to be separate, because otherwise one's marking the other one's homework. So you want to make sure that your metering and your tracking is in one technology, and then your building management system is really about the controls and optimization of your buildings. And so it's quite helpful to have them as, and then you validate them to make sure that they're like aligned.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you very much, Pietro. I think it's time to say bye. Before leaving, I want to thank all the audience for being with us today. And apologies to all those who did not receive a reply, but as said before, you can write to us. And just reminder that for those who are interested in new technologies and innovative technologies that are related to decarbonization, you can join the Decarbonization Tech Alliance with the link in chat that I leave it right now. So thank you again for being with us, and reach out if you have any questions or curiosities that you would like to deepen with one of our speakers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Giulia, for mediating. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.